Now it's time for frequently asked questions. Number one, when is an employer obliged to provide reasonable accommodation? Then, what is a conditional job offer? What type of questions may be asked to clarify disability in the workplace? What is meant by disclosure? Why is it not advisable to make a statement that some impairments are not a disability? This is frequently asked questions. Number one, when is an employer obliged to provide reasonable accommodation? In line with the Technical Assistance Guideline on the rights of persons with disabilities and the employment of persons with disabilities, paragraph 6.4. The obligation to make reasonable accommodation may arise when an applicant or employee voluntarily discloses a disability-related condition or accommodation need, or when such a need is reasonably self-evident to the employer. According to paragraph 6.4 of the Code, applicants with disabilities must be given the opportunity to voluntarily disclose their reasonable accommodation requirements during recruitment, interviewing, and any subsequent phase of employment. When it is self-evident during the interview and the selection process that an applicant or employee requires reasonable accommodation, for example, ramps into a building, the employer should inquire and reasonably respond to such request. Detailed requests for information or a detailed request for information on their requirements, however, can only be sought after a decision has been taken that they are suitably qualified for the job and a conditional job offer has been made. If reasonable accommodation is discussed before the job offer is made, it may be difficult to prove that there was no discrimination on the basis of disability. More specifically, if an employer discusses with a potential employee their reasonable accommodation requirements before a conditional job offer is made and the offer is then withdrawn, the withdrawal may be seen to relate to the employer's possible reluctance to provide reasonable accommodations. What is a conditional job offer? In line with paragraph 7.5.2 of the Technical Assistance Guideline on the Employment of Persons with Disabilities, the TAG, a conditional job offer may only be made to one person at a time and not to all applicants with disabilities that they may have applied for that job. The purpose of a conditional job offer is to allow the employer to assess the ability of the specific applicant with a disability to perform the essential functions of a specific job with or without reasonable accommodation, and not to assess the medical condition nor the nature of the disability. Any assessment or testing must comply with the legal requirements and should determine if the applicant is able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. The assessment or test should focus on ascertaining whether the applicant has the ability to perform the job and, if necessary, the type of reasonable accommodation that would assist performance. The employer may assess or test applicants with disabilities for a specific job and not require all other applicants to undergo the same assessment or testing. What type of questions may be asked to clarify disability in the workplace? Questions to clarify disability and reasonable accommodation requirements. Number one, are you aware of the type of reasonable accommodation that you require? What specific reasonable accommodation do you require? Number three, is your reasonable accommodation request time constrained? If yes, please explain. Then section B, questions are to document the reasons for accommodation request. What, if any, job function are you having difficulty performing with or without reasonable accommodation? What limitation is interfering with your ability to perform your duties or access advancement in employment? Have had any reasonable accommodations in the past for the same limitation? If yes, what was the reasonable accommodation and how effective was it? If you require reasonable accommodation, how will that assist you? And here you can see how and why the functional report from the health professional and the disability rights experts and other experts is critical. Now, question number 8, please provide any additional information that might be useful in processing or assisting in your accommodation request. And then normally they ask for comments or suggestions. Now, this is questions coming from your employer or potential employer. What is meant by disclosure? I disclose my sensory impairment hearing in a hope that my employer will remove the barriers that prevent me from participating on an equal basis with others. If we say that disability is imposed by society on persons with impairments, then the individual can only disclose their impairment, in my case, sensory impairment. They can, however, assist the employer in identifying barriers in the workplace which exclude them, hereby disabling them, because disability is imposed by society. You can disclose your impairment and start negotiating for reasonable accommodation in line with legislation. If you have an impairment, you must consider whether you can perform the essential functions of the position for which you are applying and if you need any reasonable accommodations to be successful. Remember that an accommodation is not intended to compensate for a lack of knowledge or skills. The reality is that workplace accommodations will or can only be provided when the employee discloses his or her impairment and requests for reasonable accommodations. The challenge is some employers may reject you because of negative preconceived notions about persons with impairments or disabilities. Additionally, you may feel not comfortable sharing personal information with a specific person. But it's important to understand. On the other hand, disclosing your impairment or disability allows you protection against discrimination under disability legislation. It allows you to speak honestly and openly with your employer about possible accommodations. That important aspects that might be applicable. Your knowledge of your impairment and how clearly you can discuss it. Your ability to perform the essential job functions without reasonable accommodations. How your specific impairment may affect your ability to perform the job. The employer's attitude toward people with disabilities in general. Your past accommodations in the workplace. And your suggestions for accommodations if needed. Why is it not advisable to make the statement that some impairments are not a disability? According to the social model for addressing disability, and you can find the social model in the white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities. How persons with impairments are perceived and treated rests to a large extent with society. Statements that deny that a certain impairment is a disability may imply that the person with a specific impairment has the power over how they are perceived and included in society. And we all know that is not true. Do not underestimate the difference that you can make on various levels in the process of identifying the impairment, the barriers, negotiate for reasonable accommodation, because together we are strong. This is my contact particulars, fani.dt@mweb.co.za, fanidt@ncpd.org.za, cell number 082 820 7358. I'm a deaf person, so text only, please. I thank you. Look forward to hearing from you.